Good morning to those listening. Welcome to the Design Leaders Podcast. Every day, I speak with candidates looking to grow in the world of design, development, and construction. And I speak with market leaders at the peak of their career who regularly talk about mentorship and helping the next crop of leaders in their development. How can we help professionals reach their goals in a small but ever-growing industry? Each episode, I want to provide a great opportunity for professionals of all levels to learn from market and thought leaders about avenues for development, areas of focus, how to speak about their project experience, and over time, help guide other professionals in their longer term goals and motivations. Today, I'm here with Michael Marone, Vice President of Architecture at Genesis AEC. We'll get into Michael's background in a moment, but for 20 years, Michael has worked on numerous S&T, workplace, higher ed, and K-12 projects, including new construction, extensive alterations, and renovations. His architectural approach has been responsive to the client and solutions that aren't forced, but successfully appropriate to the context of the project. Mike, I really appreciate you coming on this episode and welcome.
Thank you, Jakey.
Just firstly, the first question I always ask to these guests, kind of an opening question. So firstly, Mike, how and why did you get into architecture and design?
So architecture was in my family a little bit. My grandfather was a draftsman, and he sat for the exam one time based on the apprentice program, and he did not pass, but he continued as a draftsman, until he retired. My father went to school for 1 year of architecture school, and then became an engineer. And as I think about the differences between my father and I, it makes sense that I'm an architect and he's an engineer. He's a bit of a tinkerer. He takes things apart and fixes them. I like a higher level problem solving approach. So when I knew architecture was out there, and in middle school, as part of the wood shop, metal shop, there was a mechanical drafting class, and I took that class, and I really liked the mechanical drafting. And then it went into an architectural drafting, and in that class, we built our first models out of chipboard and foam core, and that sort of crafting and making space, that was like the first time I was really excited by something in school. And from that point forward, I started to make these models at home. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be an architect. The problem with that was that I was not a great student otherwise. I was bored in school every single day, and grades were not great. And so when in my junior year of high school, when I sat with my guidance counselor, and she said, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to become an architect." And she said, "That's going to be a problem with your grades. What else do you want to do?" And then I thought, well, geez, what else do I want to do? And I played sports all my life, played soccer. That's actually the constant in my life, longer than anything, longer than architecture, longer than almost any relationship besides my family, is that I've played soccer since I was like 4 years old. I said, well, I like sports, and maybe I'll do sports medicine. So there was this detour where I went into sports medicine my first year of college, and I played some soccer. And once I got into college and only had to do 2 or 3 classes a day, that's where like my academics flourished. And I was getting straight A's, and took my first anatomy class and said, I do not want to do this. I know that. And now that my grades were better, I went into architecture school. So I had a brief detour in college, and then graduated late as an architect.
Interesting. So you could say it's essentially in your blood, really.
It is in the blood. Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting for other professionals out there to hear that, you have made it into, a leadership position in the market, VP of architecture at Genesis, and then perhaps, in the early days of your studies, perhaps it wasn't where you were expecting. So for the others who are listening, who might be in a similar boat to Mike, just know that, the direction can change, as is so clear here. Speaking of those early days of design, obviously there's a focus now in life sciences, but where did you enter the industry, and what sector did you start your career in, Mike?
So I actually started in S&T. When I graduated, well, during my thesis year, we had a bulletin board in the studio for job postings. You know, it's 20 plus years ago, so the internet and job listings wasn't as prevalent then as it is now. So there was an office that had their job posting. It was in my hometown. So I grabbed it. I called them. It was a really small office where they did mostly lab planning. I didn't know that was a thing that existed. We had done, actually, in my third year of architecture school, we had done a laboratory building. It was more of an academic building, and we had toured the chemistry building, like on our campus, just as part of the building the program. But as far as a field and a specialty that was out there, didn't even know it existed until I interviewed with this office. And I liked it. I liked that small office approach because you get a more varied, you know, you don't just do toilet rooms, you don't just do this, you get a more varied experience set when you go to a small office. So I went there, learned how to both become an architect, because I had some great project architects there that trained me as an architect, but also learned how, you know, about the science, about lab planning, lab programming. The principal there was a great programmer, so he could build a program out of nothing, right? Out of just give me a few bits of pieces of information and I can take it from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, I've been in recruitment for some time. It's only the last kind of 3 or so years that I've focused in this space. And to be totally honest with you, I had no idea lab planning was something either. Now it's arguably one of the most interesting parts of my work, is it's specifically in lab planning and programming. Yep. Interesting. That leadership, or those individuals that you were working with way back then in those early days, whether it's them, whether it's the leadership, how do you think they will have described you as an individual in the early days of your career?
Motivated, engaged, open to learning, not afraid of making mistakes. Curious. That's one of the primary drivers. I always, and I think this comes through, is before I ask a question, I try to figure out as many of the details of it as I can, and I come with, is this right? Is this approach right? And even if those two approaches aren't right, at least, you know, it shows that I was engaged in trying to find out what the solution was.
I think one thing I see when I do speak with, you know, architectural professionals, to have that flair and that creativity on the one side, and then that interest in science facilities on the other, there has to be a genuine curiosity there. So that totally makes sense. Moving to now, Mike, how do you think your colleagues, your peers, and your employees would describe you now as a leader?
What I hope is nurturing. That I'm engaged in everyone's development, and that trying to knock down as many of the barriers for them as possible. You know, in the end, it's on them to do the work, but it's for us to help point them in the right directions, put them in the right positions, put them in a position to maybe fail only a little bit, not in a way that's catastrophic, but that they learn from. There's so many times where you can tell somebody, look out for this, look out for that, but until they actually experience that, you know, they don't know how to react, and then how to prepare for it, right? So all of my best learning experiences came from a mistake, and then making sure I wasn't going to make that mistake again. And so I always tell everybody here, let's just keep making new mistakes. Let's not make the same mistake over and over again. Let's make new mistakes.
Mm-hmm. We have a similar mantra in recruitment, the idea of failing fast, not often. So, you know, if you fail, make a mistake, that's absolutely fine. Just don't make the same mistake 4 times in a row, and learn from those mistakes. Was there a moment, Mike, where you felt that you became a leader? Was it over time? And when did you first recognize that you were a leader in this industry?
Definitely over time, and definitely it's happened much quicker in my position where I am here, because I came to an organization that was engineers first and started an architecture department 10 years ago. And so when I came in, there was only 8 of us, and now there's 50 of us. And so the growth potential came through that move. When I came here, I was still a project architect. I was a leader on projects, but not within the organization itself. So I was training recent graduates on my projects with me and helping guide them. But it's really through the growth at Genesis that I've stepped into that leadership role. And I think a lot of times it comes from just saying, hey, I'll do that. Or, hey, I'll do this. And you need me to go there, I'll go there. And you just keep opening yourself to new and more experiences. You keep learning from them. And it eventually just kind of happens. And I think being invested in people and in their growth is a great natural way for them to want to follow or work with you, right, in that role. I have one person here who always calls me boss, and I'm like, stop. And they do it really just to kind of get at me, because I'm always joking with people. And I'm like, please don't call me boss, because even if people report to me, we work together. We collaborate, we work together.
Listen, to the leaders that I've worked with that I would classify as the best leaders that I've worked with take a very similar approach to what you mentioned there. So I totally understand that. Whether it be the leaders or whether it be the individuals that were at that first firm with you that were really supportive and helped you in your development, what's something you learned from someone in the early days of your career that you've taken on board with you to this day and still stays with you to today?
Follow through. When you commit to something, you have to follow through on that thing, even if you find it going off the rails. You got to do your best to keep it on the rails. As one of the things I've learned in this position is you can only make so many commitments to so many people, right? So you always see those ratios of like 1 principal to 10 staff, or something like that. And what I've learned is it's because for them to trust you, you need to be able to consistently follow through with them, in whatever it is they're asking you to do. So you can only do that so many times in a day, so many times in a week for so many people. And so, yeah, that follow through is really important, and building that trust.
And I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to try and ask you to identify just one. If you can't identify just one and you want a couple, that's absolutely fine. But who is a quality former leader from your or mentor from your past that you really respect, and why?
So I would say Merle Taranicki is the woman who, she was a project architect that I learned under when I first came out of school. And she's actually the woman who started the architecture department here at Genesis and eventually recruited me over to keep working with her. And I worked with her for many years before, and then I left. We were working separately, and when she started this, she brought me back here to help her run this department. And so that's the person that has taught me the most here in the industry.
Interesting. And sounds like quite a profound effect on your career in general.
Absolutely.
So Mike, that's kind of an overview of your own development and your growth up until this point. Moving on to more of a design focus. If you could design or build anything, money not being an issue, what would you be designing and what would you be building?
I would want to master plan. So we work through the entire lifespan of a therapy in life sciences, right? So from initial idea, R&D, through to manufacturing. And I'd really want to master plan from scratch the whole campus that supports multiple therapies from beginning to end, and all of the buildings that requires to support that. So sort of the headquarters, the R&D, the warehouse, the manufacturing buildings, the site amenities. That would be, to me, the most fun project, because the adjacencies of all of those space types and how they interact to make the most efficient campus, and then within the buildings themselves, have them operating efficiently, would be a great challenge.
Interesting. A scale of a project at that size, I imagine you'd probably have your hands filled for a little while after working on a project
That's quite
like
a few
that.
projects that come out of just that master plan, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a hypothetical. In kind of a more of a reality based, what's the favorite project that you've been a part of in your career, and what was your role on that project?
There's a couple. I really like projects that have had an existing program component to it and then sort of an addition. So where we have to diagnose, we always say that we don't come with preconceptions. That the client is giving us symptoms and we have to figure out what's the real problem we're trying to solve here. So when you have that existing component, not just a green field, and so you're sort of cleaning up how they're doing things now and figuring out what the size of that addition is going to be. So we've had two projects here that are similar with that approach. One was for Bausch and Lomb. We essentially redesigned 75% of the first floor manufacturing area for contact lens manufacturing, put in 4 new lines, phased construction, and sort of cleaned up what had been a rat's nest of a floor plan into more of a racetrack that supported these new manufacturing lines. And then we did a 100,000 square foot addition for new technology and a different product line, contact lens, and connecting the two. And that, again, this gets back to my answer on what if I could do anything. It all started at the site level, where raw materials are coming into the site, where the finished goods, the finished products were coming out, where was waste coming from, and organizing that entire site around the manufacturing and also the support pieces. Right, there's a whole office and administrative component to that supports them, labs and all of that. So that was probably my favorite project, and it's actually one that I started at Genesis, and 2 days later I was on a plane to Rochester to survey for one of the second of those lines, because the first had been started before I got here. And we were working on that site all the way up to about 2 years ago, and when that addition was completed.
Wow, so a long
So it's
project.
building the relationship with the client and also the project itself.
I think for any other professionals out there that are listening, you can kind of get an idea or a perspective into the sorts of projects that they work on at Genesis, and I think it's interesting to note, at least. What is something about your career that you don't typically get to talk about a very lot, but you do take quite a lot of pride in?
I think internally, some of the ways we're trying to change how we operate, we're very employee focused in terms of the nurturing, and some of that based on past experience where I was dissatisfied with where I was as an employee, want to change. So, we talk about it internally a bit, but I don't talk about it externally when we're talking to clients about those things that we have career paths, different types of career paths. When I first started, it was, you're an intern, earn your credits, sit for the exam. In between that, maybe you became like a job captain, then you became a project architect, and then became a project manager, which I was never really all that interested in. And if you generate enough revenue as a project manager, maybe you become a principal. And I wanted to give different ways of achieving leadership. So we have a technical path here for project architects who want to stay on the technical side but still develop further. We have a design path for those who are interested in design roles. We have the project management role, if that is what you like. And then there's kind of subsets. We have our technical experts like lab planners, process architecture for the manufacturing projects. And so there's all these different career paths that we're helping people find by exposing them to it when they get here and they're, when they're starting their journey.
I think looking at that as kind of a supportive and flexible nature in kind of the individual following what their goals are is definitely something I'm seeing kind of across the market at the moment. But I think if it's kind of stemmed from Genesis, well done to you guys for initiating an idea like that. To the extent that you can discuss, because I understand a lot of what you work on right now might be bound by confidentiality agreements,
Sure.
but with that project that you've just spoken about there finishing 2 years ago, what is something that your team is working on right now that you find particularly impressive and noteworthy?
So we are doing a lot of work, and I can't mention companies specifically, but we work with a lot of startups on the cell and gene therapy and mRNA side of the world. And we do what we call facility specifications a lot, and they're really interesting because they're sort of like the greenfield project that you mentioned earlier. If I could do anything, they are someone who has a really interesting technology and IP. Someone thinks it can be commercialized. It has some promising early results. They might be using a contract research lab to help them through the development of it, and they're looking for their first facility, and they want to take that first facility into sort of like clinical trials. And so they don't know, they have no idea what that means because they're scientists. So we, with our entire team here at Genesis, we have process engineers who help them through what their technology is and what it might look like from an equipment standpoint. And we walk them through step by step what this facility will look like. So it's the process engineers, then the architects get involved, and then our engineers look at it from a utility standpoint. And at the end of it, they have a document to help them with a property search, to help their board make a decision, because we also have construction management here. So we have a pre-con team that'll give an estimate on what that facility will look like. So it basically gives their board all the information they need to make the next set of decisions on where that company is going. And we do that a lot. And, in those new technologies, and those are really interesting. 1 out of 10 of those actually turns into the next stage of a project, because a lot of times they get that sticker shock of like, oh, wow, that's what this really means. That's what that means. We'll stay with the contract manufacturer for a little bit longer, not outlay that capital. So those are really exciting projects, and we do them almost in all of our locations.
And just on that point there, before we do move on, all of your locations, just for those listening, Mike, whereabouts are all of your locations?
So our headquarters is in Blue Bell, which is outside of Philadelphia, and we have an office in Philadelphia. Then we have an office in Boston and in San Diego.
Interesting. Now, moving on to your upcoming goals, or kind of just a discussion around your goals. When you first started in your career, we've kind of got an idea that, architecture was in your blood from the very beginning. But what were your goals when you first started out? Have you achieved those goals, and how have they changed over time?
That's really interesting, because the goals of a, early to mid 20s person are sort of without life experience, sort of limited. But when I graduated, the world was full of architects. So, I was going to be the next architect, didn't know how, or, you don't even know how you're going to achieve that goal. But that was where I was at. I think I had always thought I was eventually going to be a principal, whether I was going to start my own firm or, grow within another. I always had that thought of, and at that point, I didn't even know why. I just thought like, maybe it was to be able to control things better, or you think you're going to be able to control things better. You really learn that so many things are out of your control. You just kind of go with the flow. And so, yeah, that's where I was when I graduated. Then you experience so many different companies and experiences within offices that you really begin to learn what leadership really means in an office. And there's that saying, you're not an architect until you're 60, just because there's so much to learn, right? There's the technical aspect of it, there's the business side of it, there's the operations. There's so many things that go into it that when you graduate from architecture school, all you've done is gone through design studios. You are maybe a half decent designer of some sort, but you're nowhere near ready to be an architect. And so that learning and all those different paths that are available to you, that informs where you might end up. So the role that I'm in now is nothing like I thought it would be when I graduated, but it's that path but I'm satisfied with it. I'm happy with where I'm at the moment.
Good. That is good to hear. On the flip side of that, there must be things that you might not have achieved that you were looking for. Now, obviously, we've just alluded to there that you might not have expected to be in this position, but you are satisfied with this position. What have you not yet achieved in your career that you obviously want to continue to achieve, and what does that mean to you?
So when I thought I was going to be doing all of these new shiny buildings, and I've done a couple of them as a project architect. So I haven't done many of those as an architect. We have focused more on renovations and additions than new buildings, and the new buildings are coming as we get larger. But now I'm not I'm not involved in the projects per se as the designer, as the project architect. So they're other people's work, but I'm comfortable helping to facilitate their visions. That's where I'm really happy is, architects use a lot of words to describe their designs. And it's like, well, I'm looking at it and I don't see what you're telling me it's supposed to be doing or saying. And I really like to challenge here people with what they're saying. So while I never did many of those buildings, I'm happy to facilitate others achieving that for themselves.
How selfless. I think there's
and also that on the flip side, you realize like in our current world, if we can reuse things instead of always having to build new, that might be the better direction to go in anyway, right? And that reuse sometimes is more interesting to me. It sometimes creates a better, more interesting solution when you sort of integrate the modern into something that might have been around for 100 years, right? And make that reusable, reworkable.
I think those listening that have an environmental focus will likely agree with you. In terms of the next stage of your career, Mike, what are the goals for the next decade? What's the plan?
So ideally, I'm going to actually move beyond architecture, Genesis, and into leadership overall within the organization, and helping the senior partners here now built something really strong and something that we can take and move forward with and make even stronger. And the thought is that we continue to, as we have succession after succession, give something over that's stronger than when we inherited it, so that the next generation can build on that. That's really the legacy that I'm looking to build here.
It's interesting because, within our own company here at Harper Harrison and LHI, we have a philosophy of younger you. So it's kind of leaving your desk in a better place for the next person than when you first entered. So great idea there. Now, looking at kind of the next section of advice for industry professionals, you will come across probably a number of different more junior professionals, intermediate professionals, and even senior professionals as well. But when looking at a resume, what do you want to see from a top quality candidate, Mike?
So our industry is so niche. It's very hard to find people who have the experience that we're always looking for. So I want varied experience, and in the resume, I don't want too many prior experiences, but just enough, right? That sort of, they've been somewhere 4 or 5 years, and then they were looking for something new, 4 or 5 years, maybe that wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be. But then I really like to talk, and we keep trying to fine tune the questions we ask to get to that curiosity and the driver. While we are very employee focused, there's still, which means we try not to overwork people. We try to be fair on hours, salary, all of that. But there still needs to be sort of a rigor on the employee side that's coming to us about their approach to things. And so we try to look, work is work. It's always going to be work, but if you can be invested and passionate about it, sometimes it doesn't feel like work, right? Some days you can, not every day you're going to be excited to come in, but there should be a certain number of days where you're excited to come in, and because you're going to be sketching that day, you're going to be modeling something that day, something that really is the reason why you got into architecture. And we tried to provide as many of those opportunities to keep people invested. And so on the flip side, we want them to be coming with an enthusiasm and a curiosity to learn, to investigate things for themselves, to ask questions at the right time. And so, we don't have it perfected yet, how to get that and how to make the fit work. But we're working towards that always.
Brilliant. Now, as a specialist recruiter in this S&T and life science space, it's music to my ears to hear you say how hard it is to find talent in this space. And you're absolutely right. It is. But if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't be in the job, right? So it's
That's right.
a good thing. What, you mentioned there about, really liking to talk with the individual. So assuming we're through that resume point and we're now speaking with that individual, we're in an interview. What are some mistakes that you've seen candidates make when discussing their experience?
Sometimes you'll get a really interesting portfolio, right? And the work looks great, and they can't explain it. They can't explain what they're, how they got to that solution, what the drivers were. And this isn't even like professional work. It's been at both levels. It's been someone who brought a professional portfolio, but it also with a college portfolio where it's like, how you did the work. How can you not explain to me what the drivers were, how you got to where you were? So I really click with people who become animated with explaining that the project, and how they got to the end solution. And, maybe there was a bump in the road, and how they overcame that challenge in the project is what I'm always looking for.
Of course, hearing that passion, the animation in the voice when they're discussing the project shows their motivations. So I get that. Now, I've got a question here about how the dynamic of the industry and the makeup of the industry is likely to change over the coming years. I've got a feeling within your industry specifically of S&T and life sciences, you could probably have a number of different answers for a number of different time ranges. But over the next, let's say, decade, how do you think the industry is going to change?
That's interesting because so Revit, right? 3D modeling, the BIM, the building information model. We started using it. I've started using it almost 20 years ago. And at the time, there was this talk of it was going to become, we were going to do away with the paper. We're going to turn a model over to the builder. And, I think there's definitely projects that are doing that. It feels a little bit like cold fusion. It's always 10 years away from being 10 years away as like a industry-wide thing. I am interested. I hate buzzwords, but I am interested in what maybe some of the AI could do to help us, as a tool. That's the thing that's always important, is to use it as a tool. You still have to be in control of it. So those things of like, automating certain things that are tedious now, if you can automate that. We're always toying with how to use different tools. So whether it be VR or AR, 3D modeling, I see it all having more influence. It's really about how fast that happens. We're now doing a lot of modular construction where there's a warehouse offsite. I think that is the thing that will see the most impact over the next 10 years, which is, building offsite and then building in place quickly.
It's interesting. I've seen recently on LinkedIn, it was an individual shared a rendering or a draft of a multi-family residential facility that was created all from ChatGPT and the related softwares. And I was thinking in my head, and at what point does that software replace the individuals that I'm looking for? I'm hoping not ever. Now, I do want to.
I was just wanting to say, like, construction is a real world thing, right? There's so many trades that are still using old world technologies, and modernizing those would be a first step. But there's constraints around what you can do at scale in a real world condition like that, and how fast you can take any of these new technologies and scale them up where the entire industry is using them.
Interesting. Now, I want to give you a chance to talk about Genesis just in a little bit more detail and tell the listeners, some of the interesting things going on at the moment. But one thing you did mention earlier on in this podcast, and as a young English individual, I can't help but touch on, you mentioned your love of soccer, played since you were 4 years old. So before we just finish off talking about Genesis, favorite player, favorite team, and who's winning the World Cup?
So my favorite player is Messi, but I'm assuming I'm going to have to pick a new one sooner than later here. I'm hoping for some American players. I don't think it is realistic, but I don't have I mean, the Union are my favorite team because they're local. I watch all the Premier League games every Saturday and Sunday morning. That's how I start my day on the weekends, with the coffee and newspaper on my iPad and watching the games. So I'm since I didn't grow up with it, it's hard for me to have an affinity, but I've been following the American players. So for a little while it was Chelsea. Now I'm watching Leeds because they seem to be just trying to put the entire U.S. national team on the Leeds roster, and I don't know how successful that'll be. So you want a 2026 World Cup prediction?
I do.
Oh, man. I'll go Brazil.
It's an easy answer. I was hoping for a bit of a backing of the USA there, but
I can't get there yet. They're just like Revit. They're 10 years away from being 10 years away.
Always. But I
if we
think
can get them to the quarterfinals or the semis, that'll be a win.
That'll be a good start. In our office, it's probably 60% Americans, 40% English. So there's a bit of a rivalry when it comes to football, or soccer, as I should say. But as a young man from Manchester, big Manchester United fan, hearing you support Leeds is a little bit disappointing. But Mike, we'll get over that. Now, just coming to the end of this, is there anything that you feel is important to talk about Genesis? Because we will be sharing this episode with individuals in your space, and I just wonder if there's anything that we've not spoken about Genesis that you think is important to approach.
Sure. Before I came to Genesis, I had never worked at an AE. It always been traditional architecture firm. I would never go back at this point. I really love the integration of having the and also the construction management team. And so Genesis is full service. We have architects, engineers, construction managers, and commissioning, qualification, and validation. So in the kinds of projects we work in, many times we'll provide the full suite of services. The client wants, one company to go to for all of that and rely on that. And the way we've been developing how we work interdisciplinary is really great. There's a lot of projects where there's overlap between disciplines, and that's really great. So we will do a lot of laboratory planning that supports manufacturing, and they want to really get down to the number of samples that they can throughput from the manufacturing floor, so that they don't hold up production and they're releasing product. And so a lot of times we'll have our process engineers help us with some modeling, supporting the lab planners to figure out how to lay that out. And so there's overlap there, and we have that all the time, really, and how we work together as teams. Back to all my sports backgrounds, you try to find complementary players, right? His strengths are my weaknesses, my strengths are their weaknesses, and how you come together as a team is always important. So we have specialists here that know all the science. We have generalists that understand what the specialists do, but turn it into architecture and engineering. And then construction managers who know how to build these types of spaces. And we pick each other up throughout the length of the project. So having that interdisciplinary approach is exciting. I appreciate it very much. And I couldn't imagine going back to hiring sub-consultants for everything we do, and leading the team that way.
Interesting. Well, I hope those that are listening are taking on board what you're saying about an AEC firm. By no means is it the only firm, but it is unique in a sense, in your location, in your sector specific as well. So hope those listening do take that on board. If people listening do want to learn more and they want to, find out more about you, more about Genesis, what can they do, Mike? Can they connect? Can they follow? What can they do in terms of online information?
Yeah, we're on all the social media. We are on LinkedIn. The website is genesisaec.com. And that's what we post under also throughout. And there's ways to contact us through each of those means.
Awesome. Well, I hope you don't mind when we inevitably share this podcast, your LinkedIn profile will also be connected. So I would advise anyone who is listening, who's taken an interest here, to go ahead and follow and try and connect with Mike online. But for now, Mike, listen, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. I think there'll be tons of people who will take, information from this podcast, and hopefully it will impact their career. But for now, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today.